Okay, thanks for coming. I don't want to. I've made this presentation look like a notebook because that's exactly what it is. This summer, will get into this. I was actually on a leave of absence from Intel, and I spent a lot of time making notes to myself, learning, writing things down, coming up with strategies to deal with different situations and different ways to think about things. And so this is really my notes to myself. And everything on here is something that when I say it, I'm saying it to myself. It doesn't mean that I've got it mastered, and it doesn't. And this is I feel in a way overwhelmed talking to an audience about stuff like this. I've been on the stage before talking about all sorts of technical roadmaps and this and that. This is a lot different. This is going to be very personal, and I basically offer it to you in hopes that it's helpful. It's been really helpful to me. So, I chose a notebook template and the funny font so it doesn't look official. It's notes to myself. Okay. And I am qualified to talk about this. I know a lot about stress. You guys probably do too. But I know a lot about stress, and I've read a lot, and I've gone to a lot of different kind of doctors about stress, and I've tried a lot of different things about stress. So again, hopefully this will be helpful to you. And the other thing is I'm going to talk about things at work that are stressful. Don't get the idea that that's Intel. That's just life, and I don't want to make anything sound like, oh, Intel, you get so many email messages, it's overwhelming. It's not Intel. It's life. And it's not what people do to us, it's how we react to it. So I just wanted to make that caveat too to start with. So my story here about stress, probably best place to go back to is the last couple of years. I got very anxious about my own performance at Intel as an engineer, as a fellow. I look at some of the other guys and go, wow, those guys really know what they're doing. And, frankly, I felt intimidated and like it was a class above what I was able to do. I was anxious about Intel. Wow, we got all this competition all of a sudden. We're going to have layoffs, or am I going to have a job? That's quite a bit of projecting forward negatively. But I was worried about Intel and what it's going to be like because things are different. I had this growing band of tension in my chest that didn't go away. Craig last time talked about he had this band of tension in his chest. I had the same thing, and it just was getting worse and worse and more constant during the year. I was developing enemies, which sort of surprised me, and I'll talk about what I mean by an enemy later on. But I was developing seemed like enemies, and that was causing me a lot of stress to know that it didn't seem like somebody liked me. I was brain locked. I remember the fall IDF, a Intel Developer Forum a year ago in the fall, just about this time. I was trying to work on a presentation, and I would just sit and not be able to figure out what I wanted to say. And and I usually don't like to do this, but I took it home and started working on it. I just sat at home and started some stuff through that way, got really frustrated, just brain locked. Couldn't say no. People would say, we really like this data. Could you guys do this for us? I'd say, oh yeah, that's really important that Intel have this data. Yeah, we'll do that. Well, you have to say no. And I'll say more about that. Tired, just physically tired and overwhelmed. Get 50 or 100 email messages a day. They stack up. You go on a trip, come back with a bunch of things you have to do, and you find you've got 150 email messages, and some of them are important, and it was just overwhelmed. Okay, so that's what was happening to me. I just felt like I was on a downhill slope. Didn't realize it though. I mean, even with all this happening, there wasn't like this light going on, like you're on this downhill slope. I didn't realize it until March 31st. I was on a business trip, and I got home in the afternoon, and for the week before, that chest tightness had been worse and didn't seem to be going away, and was a little bit different than it had been. And I was really tired, and I curious, why isn't this chest tension going away? Usually at least it goes away if I exercise or something. And it didn't go away. In fact, I worked out that afternoon and it didn't go away. I woke up in the middle of the night and I had all that. Plus, I felt really weird and I was sweaty and clammy and just lightheaded. I thought, there is something really wrong with me. I woke up my wife and we talked and decided to call up the hospital and say, these are my symptoms, should I be concerned? They said, why don't you call 911? And they said, are you alone? I said, no. They said, don't drive. So that helped my stress level right there. Just that was really fun. So I get to the hospital. In fact, they hook you all up there. It was in our bedroom, got it hooked up on the EKG and IV and all this jazz. Middle of the night, go to the hospital, and I was just freaked out. I was just shaken, and the doctor said, well, it doesn't look like anything's really going on, but they tried a few things, didn't change anything. But they said, you sure are worked up. My blood pressure and my heart rate was really high. Stayed in the hospital for the rest of the day, and they did some tests, and I eventually even did a treadmill test and a bunch of stuff. So there's nothing physically wrong with you, was the conclusion. That was the day that Craig Kinney did his thing last, was that day. I remember it well. Okay, so I'd call that, stress building to it. Then I realized I had a problem. But I didn't really realize it was stress at that point. All that happened, I knew there was something that was happening that was bad, but I didn't know, I thought the doctors must be missing something. There's got to be something wrong with me. I don't see what's so stressful about my life. They didn't give me any good answers. They said it was probably some stress thing, but I didn't feel that stressed, even though all this stuff was happening. That's where my mind was at. I didn't feel that stressed. And I would wake up in the middle of the night or trying to go to bed, and I think, they must have missed something. There's something wrong with me. I've got cancer. There's a tumor next to my heart. It's putting pressure on my chest. I'm going crazy. It was a different thing all the time, but I was having a hard time. I was very thankful there's nothing physically wrong with me, though. Okay, so I came back to work a couple days later, and everything seemed okay, but I felt strange still and very wired, and I'd come home and would be shaken sometimes. And it turns out, I didn't know it at the time, but what was happening to me, I was getting something called panic attacks, which it doesn't mean, oh my gosh, something's happening to me right now, I should panic. It's nothing's happening to me right now, and I'm panicking for no reason. And so what would happen to me, and this happened at work, in fact, one of the worst ones happened right over a couple doors away in one of the conference center rooms. Andy Grove was giving his Slurp kickoff. It was a big, important meeting. I really wanted to be there, sitting right next to Sanjay. And I'm in this meeting, and my heart's going like 120 beats per minute. And I'm starting to shake, and I felt lightheaded. And I thought, I got to get out of here. And so I got up and left. I thought, I need to go by the guard station, because when I keel over, the guards will know what to do, And that's exactly what I was thinking, And so I walked over to the guard station, and I called the doctor from the guard station where the guard could see me, because that's exactly what I was thinking. And I told the doctor, something's really wrong with me, and he tried and convince me that wasn't the case, but I felt that. Anyway, through a series of visiting several doctors and a bunch of things, eventually it came to the point where I decided the best thing to do would take a medical leave of absence to try and get a handle on this. And so that's what I did in June. And it turned, panic attacks are something that happen to some people. I think that they think maybe 2% of the population when you're overstressed. Other people get different things, Might be an ulcer, might be some other kind of disease, heart disease or something. But for some people, and that's what I'm saying, this is what applies to me, but it may be different for you. I got panic attacks. And it also, different people have different thresholds of what's too much. And I exceeded mine, yours might be different. So during that time I was on leave of absence, that's when I worked on this notebook of mine and coming up with what I should do about stress. So what I want to do is give a little bit about me and what makes me up so that you can see why certain things stress me and other things don't. Then talk about different specific situations that might stress me out and what truths I used to deal with that. And there's some other things too that there are techniques to deal with. Okay, so first a little bit about me. This one, actually I need my note sheet. It is me after all. Well, as I was a kid and growing up, I went to church, and I always believed in God. I'd look up at the sky at night, see all the stars, how infinite that is, how big it is, mind-boggling. And then also, in science class, I learned, how small things can be, subatomic physics, and they're always whatever the thing is, it used to be the atom, fundamental unit. Now then it's protons, and then it's quarks and this and that, and subatomic particles, and just keeps going. You almost get the impression it's infinite that way too. And all the design of it all, how, it just convinced me there was a God. But I didn't know anything about what the implications of that were. What did God want of me? Why? How is it relevant to my life other than that he exists? Well, I wasn't real popular in high school, and this is where I need my prop. I gotta stand up for this. This is my HP 45 that I had in high school and wore on my belt, and like this. That's part of the reason. Now, what's funny, I was laughing about this last night. I thought I should bring my calculator. This is the actual calculator case. I didn't bring the actual calculator that I wore in high school. This is my Palm Pilot now that has a little hook to stick in my belt. So I've come full circle. Okay. I don't actually stick on my belt usually because I stick it on my finger like this because painful memories. Okay, when I was in high school, I had friends, but they were mostly acquaintances. People I hung out with, and we'd insult each other, and bug each other and that kind of thing. And there's something in me that really wanted to know how to love my friends. I wanted to love people. I wanted to somehow my relationship with them would result in them better for them because of our interaction. I wanted to serve, help, love, encourage. But all I knew how to do was insult, give a hard time, hang out with. That was a deep need in my life. And actually still characterizes me today a little bit, that's a desire that I have that I'm working on, and I'm still not all that great at it. Okay, so there's a church one night, and this guy comes in that I hadn't seen before. He looked like Johnny Cash. That's why I said Johnny Cash. He was black. He wasn't black. He wore black pants, black shirt, black hat even, and had a black Bible. I thought, well, what a stereotype. Coming in, I didn't like him. He was from the South. He talked like he was from the South. He hit all my stereotypes about what I didn't like. He asked a question, though. He said, well, how many of you, if you were to die right now, would know that you go to heaven? And I thought, oh, that's a good question. And this girl next to me raises her hand and says, I do. I thought, how conceited. How can she possibly know that the good things she's done outweigh the bad things? And I thought of myself, say, I don't know. I know the things I've done. I can't love people very well. How does that balance out? Well, the guy told me some things, or said some things, that kind of destroyed my concept of this balance. He said, well, he quoted a few verses out of the Bible. And by the way, they don't fit on the, I'm sorry. They don't fit on the slides, so there are a few scriptural references I'm going to read or quote, and they're in the back on a page in the back, kind of fine print, actually, when it gets reduced to 2 per page. First one was, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Okay? that to me was the badness part of this equation. I thought, I can't even do the things I want to do, my own moral code. I can't live up to it. And yet, and let alone God's moral code. And that's basically what it's talking about when it's talking about sin. You can't meet up with God's moral code. And I couldn't live up to my moral code. So, thought, yeah, I believe that. Next one, Romans 6:23. It says, "For the wages of sin is death." Well, it's not a balance. If there's anything on this pan at all, you deserve death. But the verse goes on, but the free gift of God is eternal life. So there's hope. But it's not this balance thing. It's not good works outweighing bad works. It's got to be something else, because it's not. If there's any bad, which there's plenty of bad in me, it's not a balance. So the next thing he said was something like, this is John 5:24. "I tell you the truth. Whoever hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life and does not come into judgment. He's crossed over from death into life." Okay, now we'll get some hope. You don't come if you believe him who sent. If you believe in Christ and him who sent him. Okay, you've crossed over death and life. You're not on the scale thing anymore, because that scale thing's a losing proposition. And so it said Christ. Basically, talks about how Christ. When it talks about Christ dying on the cross, well, that's what it means. He paid the penalty for our sin. Well, and then the last one was John 5:11 to 12. It says something about, "He who has the Son has life, and who has not the Son of God has not life." So it's about relationship. So that night when I understood that, my concept of the balance was destroyed. I realized it was about relationship with Christ and him paying the penalty for my sin. So I decided to commit my life to Christ then. So some of you are probably saying, well, what does this have to do with stress? That's a nice story, and it is a very nice story, actually, for me. But what does that do with stress? Well, it has everything to do with stress, because how you respond to circumstances and stress has everything to do with your worldview, how you look at things, and whether or not things are random, or whether or not there is a God, and whether God cares or not care. That has a lot to do with how you respond to a lot of kinds of stress. There's other kinds of stress, like too many email messages. That, there's some common sense things, but a lot of stress that affects me has to do with worldview and truths and how I look at myself. So, next thing, before I go into the specific kinds of stress, a little bit about the foundation then, for me. And this comes to that exact worldview about how you can respond to circumstances. Okay, the first truth, I think, is that God is powerful. Okay, I could see that in the stars, in some atomic physics. Anybody who can do that, they're powerful. Okay, I'm not worried about power. The part I was worried about was, does God care about me? And I learned that God is also loving and good. And I call this, and there's a verse that says, it's actually, there are a bunch of, the context around it, there's a bunch of people getting ready to sing and trumpets and big parade. And they sing, this is in the Old Testament, "He is good, his love endures forever." Now, to me, I put those two things together, that God is loving and cares about me, that he's all-powerful. Okay, nothing can happen to me that gets by God's filter of his love. Doesn't mean everything's happy or even good or understandable or fair, but it means that nothing that happens to me gets beyond this filter of God's love. Now, this is not the normal thing I talk about in this auditorium, but I say that's not a cheap truth for me, and I'll tell you why. It's an easy thing to say. Nothing can get it. But where this was burned into my heart was about 10 years ago. Kathy and I were expecting our first child. Sarah was her name. She was born prematurely and died. Okay, that was, I won't go into a long story about it, but that was real hard for us. And, you struggle a little bit. Well, is God good? Is God powerful? Why did this happen? I don't know why it happened, but in the struggle, I came to be absolutely, totally convinced that God is good and his love endures forever. So that's my rock. That's something I can grab onto no matter what happens to me, no matter what stress. I can always point back to that. I call that truth 1A because I want to combine the two later on. Truth 1B, God doesn't want us to be anxious. There's a verse, Philippians 4, 6 and 7. It says, be anxious for nothing. Don't be anxious. But in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. Tell God what you're anxious about, what you want to happen. Doesn't mean it's always going to happen the way you ask, but then it says, if you do that, it says the peace of God will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. So God doesn't want us to be anxious. He wants us to tell him about what we're anxious about, pray about it, and he will give us peace. So that's those two things together I combine, and that's truth number one. It's like, you ever seen the thing up on somebody's wall? Rule number one, the boss is always right. Rule number two, in case the boss is wrong, refer to rule number one. Well, this is mine like this. Truth number one, nothing can happen to me that's not filtered through God's love. And two, God doesn't want us to be anxious. He wants us to express our feeling to him. Those two things, I'll call them truth number one. So truth number two would be, whenever it seems like that's not true, refer to truth number one. So that's what I need to do. Okay, so now let's get to specific things. That's kind of the foundation. I don't know. I get anxious about February, January, late January. Start to think about the year. Think about, we're going to have ranking and rating pretty soon. I start to think about, well, how am I going to do? And I kind of have a philosophy about that now. That is, and as an employee, if there's something that I'm doing that's really wrong or not right, I would already know it, and my boss would already tell me. If there's something that I should feel bad about. My review tells me how to improve, so it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. In fact, there's a verse that says, wounds from a friend can be trusted, but enemies multiply kisses. Kind of like, it's a good thing to have constructive feedback on a review, even if you don't like it. It's a good thing. It helps you to improve. But it's not at all about measuring my worth as a person. And if I'm not capable of performing at a certain level, and I'm working appropriately hard, and I'm trying to do everything I can and really have in mind serving Intel, serving my manager, serving the people who work for me, if that's not good enough, that's okay. Because my worth as a person isn't measured by what I get on my review. In fact, an outstanding or faster or a promo can be bad. I mean, I can think of two ways it can be bad. One is if you're working too hard because you have in mind that I will make it as soon as I get this level of promotion or this much money. You work too hard, you lose balance in your life, priorities. And so, you get this. So you get promoted. And you kind of get locked into then to having to work hard, because at that level then, you got to keep doing the same thing. So that may not be good. I'm not saying, and this is where I have to be careful, I'm not saying at all, I mean, it's very good to be promoted. It's very good to get a good review. But I think only when it's within our capabilities, we're not overreaching, and only when we're having the right priorities in our life. I don't know, don't misunderstand me on that. Okay, so as a manager, there's some things here too. Well, as an employee, when I know ranking ratings going on for me, they're talking about me in some conference room. If I'm anxious, rule number one, if you're anxious, let your requests be known to God. Okay, what are my requests to God? Not that I would do well on that list, but give the guys doing this wisdom, fairness, that kind of thing. And if something if I get a bad review, it's happened, refer to truth number one. Even if it wasn't fair, nothing can happen to me that isn't filtered by God's love and power. Okay, as a manager, same thing. Those of you who are managers know there's a lot of concern and care about what happens to the people who work for you in ranking and rating, and it's a very hard thing to do. And I pray, and I try and find people in my organization that are in the same rank group. We pray beforehand that we could do a fair job and do this right. And that also helps me to be less anxious about what happens when we're arguing about some things. Okay, but ultimately, there's one review I really care about. I care about what happens. I mean, don't get me wrong, I really care about my review at work. But there's one I care about a lot more that really matters. And that's the end of my life review, the well done, my good and faithful servant. That's the review I care about and want to get. And I want to do well at work, and doing well at work is a good thing. But that's the review I care about. So that's what I think about when I think about vocal. Now, a harder one for me is actually expectations on self. This one, I'm not sure I can communicate that this well. And this one doesn't even fit with some of the things I've been saying, because I still have this belief in me somehow that my worth as a person is determined by how much I produce, how much I can achieve, and even worse sometimes, whether people like me. And none of that's true. This doesn't really adequately describe it, but I don't, Intel's got 60-some thousand people, okay? That means that this is a team, and we can share Intel's problems. I don't need to solve all of them. I'm not personally responsible for all of them. If I can't today figure out what the strategy is that solves all this other stuff, that's okay. I don't have to feel bad that I can't solve all of the problems, even in my area, because they're hard problems, obviously. And the other thing is, I don't have to match up with a composite of the best attributes of all my peers. And that's what I do to myself. I look at different people and I say, wow, that guy is really, really good at that. He's not so good at some other things, but I only remember he's really good at that. This other guy's really good at this other thing, and this other guy's really good at that. I form this composite and say, I'm not even close to this composite image. Well, that's true. I'm not. And I need to just, I don't have any, scriptural references or anything on this one. It's just that I need to really work through and say, what's true? That's an irrational belief. Doing a composite image is stupid. Understanding where I can grow, that's a good thing. But a composite image and comparing myself, that's not. Okay, another thing that can cause anxiety, Intel business conditions and competition. Will Intel continue to do well? Sometimes I think that. What'll happen? All the, we'll get all this imitator stuff coming from the low end. We'll lose all their margin. The company will make about 1/3 the amount of money it makes today. 2/3 of us have to get laid off. I can construct the disaster scenario really well. But that's not what I think is going to happen, by the way. That's just that my mind can construct disaster scenarios very well. That's why I'm so good at stress. There's a verse that's really meant a lot to me. Actually, before I came back to Intel, I worked at Sequent, and Sequent's a smaller company, not the big like Intel, and Sequent was really getting beat up as a company. And there's this verse I came across, Psalm 147, 10, 11. It says, "His pleasure is not in the strength of the horse, nor his delight in the legs of a man. The Lord delights in those who fear him and put their hope in his unfailing love." And to me, the strength of a horse and the legs of a man, that's symbolic of strength. God doesn't get excited about Intel being strong and being a 20-some billion dollar company and making all these profits, anti-gross profit machine. That doesn't excite God. There's nothing wrong with it. It's good. But that's not what excites God. What excites God is me trusting in his unfailing love, not anti-gross profit machine. So whenever I think about Intel doing well, I remember, again, truth number one, nothing can happen to me that isn't filtered by God's love, and that he doesn't want me to be anxious, and that he delights in those who trust in his unfailing love. Okay, how about the money part of that? Will the EB be good this year? Will I make money on stock? Will the ECBP be good? those are the two things I think about. One is, I think the first one is, everything I have comes from God. All this good stuff. It says, there's a verse, Deuteronomy 8:17-18 says, you may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. And we may think that, hey, we've done a really good job. The reason why we're getting all this money from stock and bonus and all that is because we've done a really good job. It says, no, but remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gave you the ability to produce wealth. That's true. So you think about, no, we've done a good job collectively, but some of us being at the right place at the right time and all that kind of stuff. And so that takes some of my focus on, is it us? It's God that decides that, how things go with companies. There's another one, Luke 12:15. This more when I start to focus on this, start to focus on the money equation and worrying about that. This is Jesus talking. He said to them, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life doesn't consist in the abundance of his possessions. So I think, wait a second. It doesn't matter it's nice when the EV's big and we make a lot of money on stock. That's a good thing. But that is not defining my life. My life doesn't consist of how much money I have, how much my stock options are worth, how much stuff I've got. That doesn't define my life. Another kind of anxiety, you're in this, you think, does Craig Barrett know what he's doing? Does Craig Kinney know what he's doing? Do I know what I'm doing? No, you think, will leadership make good decisions? And sometimes you're in a meeting and you wonder if they know what they're doing, because we don't know everything they know. And sometimes they may not know what they're doing. Okay, I don't have a scriptural reference for this, but I think the thing is to pray for them that they will have wisdom. It talks about praying for our leadership in government. I think that applies here to Intel. Pray for those guys. It's a hard job. I'm high enough that I can at least see how hard it is. It's real hard. So that's what I do when I have anxiety about Intel business conditions and competition. Now this one's interesting. Enemies. My first thought is me, enemies? Why would anybody not like me? Of course, because I need people to like me for me to be okay. So I don't really think I have any enemies in the sense of people who really wish me personal harm. But, being in certain positions you're at, you have to make decisions that are unpopular sometimes. People have emotional, if you've been working on something for a year and trying to drive a certain thing, and some executive has to make a decision, is that something we should continue or not? Well, especially there are two sides to it. Somebody's going to be real disappointed. They have a lot of emotional energy, a lot of time invested in it. They're going to have a hard time with that. And I've been involved in this last year in a couple like that a lot of people had a lot invested in what I not only decided, but I drove the decision. I felt it was my job, to go around the company and say, this is a bad idea. Well, that was hard for some people, and it created some enemies in the sense of some people who don't like me. Now, that's not personal, but they don't. And they told me so, sent me a nasty email telling me so. And since I like to be liked, that was very stressful. The other reason is some political things. There are some people who just are doing things and maneuvering for political reasons, and you're somehow caught in their scheme, and you become an enemy because you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. That happens too. But in either case, the response is, first one, she said, you've heard say, love your neighbors and hate your enemies. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Not that we're getting persecuted, but pray for your enemies. Pray for those guys. You start praying for them, and that helps you to understand get more of the perspective about, they have emotional energy, it's not personal. That changes things. Second thing, live at peace with your enemies. This verse says, when a man's ways are pleasing the Lord, he makes even his enemies at peace with him. You have some control over how much your enemies can hurt you by living with integrity and not. And then the next thing is by not inflaming them. This next verse says, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. It's important to not fan the flames by saying something that in kind.
Code 1, code 1, code 1.
Okay, I'll wait for the code 1. There, okay. And finally, don't retaliate. Don't repay evil with evil, that verse says, and I'm going to move a little faster. That doesn't mean, roll over for your enemies or let them take advantage of you. It just means these are some guidelines for dealing with people who might consider you as enemies. Okay, another thing is a big meeting. Like I'm trying to convince my boss why my project should continue, or something like that. Just a little short thing there. There's a proverb that says, the horse is made ready for the day of battle, but victory rests with the Lord. So that means prepare, be ready. But in the end, it's in God's hands, and trust him. Refer to truth number 1. Nothing can happen to me, blah, blah, blah. Be anxious for nothing. Okay, anxiety. This may be one for only us older people. Maybe not, I don't know, but I felt it more the last couple years. Does what I'm doing really matter? Am I a materialist? Am I selling out by working at the corporate environment rather than being with the Peace Corps? That kind of thing. And the answer is no. God wired me, he created me this way to be a good engineer. Nothing wrong with that. He made other people good at being Peace Corps people. I'd be a lousy Peace Corps person or a lousy missionary. But I make a good engineer. He made me that way. That's good. Work is good. Work is, in the Garden of Eden, paradise, before the fall of man and everything started falling apart, Adam and Eve had work to do. It was good. It was for their benefit. It was a good thing. So there's some things. So work is good. Me working is good. Me enjoying it is good. In fact, it says, we can pray for God to bless our work. Establish the work of our hands for us, is what that verse says. I do that, and that's a good thing to do. Work is for God, not for men. It's a good thing to work for men, but ultimately, when it's a work for God, think about ultimately you're doing a good job, not for intel, not for a particular person, but because of work as if you're working for the Lord. Another one, it talks about being skilled at work is a good thing. Being really good is a good thing. It's that particular verse says, you see a man skilled in his work, he'll work before kings. And last one, satisfaction with work is a gift from God. It's a good thing. Enjoying work, that's a good thing. So that's real helpful for me when I think about that. This is the way God wired me. I'm right. Anything else would be wrong for me. Work is good. So that really helps me when I'm anxious about that. Does anybody else have those feelings? I do, but okay. Now I'm switching gears a little bit. I'm changing from what I call anxiety to stress. This is more like the overwhelming flood of ARs and email and stuff like that I'm talking about. You get 50 or more emails a day, and a lot of them have ARs. Sometimes you have meetings all day. So, you get back to your desk at 5, and you've got 30 emails to read, some of which are asking you things to do. Others present things that are all screwed up that you have to get involved in and try and fix. That's stressful. And there's always more, and there's always opportunities. We're getting this group together to study this, or we're going to try this. We really use your input. Can you join us? Or there's never a lack for more good things to get involved in, let alone bad things to be involved in, but even good things. There's never a lack. But this is no way to live. You'd be in meetings all day. You'd be reading email all night. I can't do that. In fact, I don't think that's the way God wants me to live. It says, my yoke is easy, and you will find rest for my souls. There's that. I didn't put the verse on there. It's in the notes. I don't think that's the way we're designed to live. And I thought about, there's a verse that says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. We're not going to be, another translation says, don't let the world squeeze you into its mold. Just all of us together are going to develop some habits and some things that, like sending so much email and so many meetings. Those aren't always good, and we need to think about, well, when is that trying to squeeze us into something that's not good? For me personally, and again, this isn't Intel, this is life. This is the same in any company. I need to set some limits on I need to say no more. I need to, and I've worked with my admin to make sure I don't have meetings all day. I have to say no to meetings. Sorry, I can't do that. I need some time to think. Get off reflectors that I don't really, it's good to know about some of that stuff, but it's a lot of noise. I don't need to know. I don't need to read every status report from this part of the company or that part of the company. Yes, it's more information, but what's best for Intel? That I have a brain and I can actually think, or that I know what everybody in the whole company is doing? And I decided for me, what I need to do is know a little bit less and think a little bit more. Yeah, I really believe that perspective and creativity in our best work comes from having some time to think, not from, you don't have your best work and creativity when you're in the middle of reading 500 messages. It doesn't happen that way. Okay, gotta hurry. Oh, no, hurry's on my list of things I shouldn't do. It is true, I have to quicken my pace, I'll say. There's some other things that were really interesting. As I got into this, I found out I had some very unusual, maybe they're not unusual, but some habits that were really hurting me physically. First was, one doctor suggested I go to somebody that does biofeedback, and all that means is they put monitors on your skin temperature, your heart rate, your respiration, your muscle tension, whether you're breathing from your abdomen or your chest, a bunch of stuff like that. And then this is me at my first session. Where it starts to jog down, they asked me to do a math problem. Very simple. But look what happened to my skin temperature. It went down significantly. The reason that the general thing is upstroke was because it wasn't calibrated, or I was just getting to the right temperature. But that made my skin temperature go down. That made me realize there's a lot of things physically going on that I wasn't even aware of. You would ask me, is that happening? I'd say no. Then they asked me about something that happened at work that made me mad. And some of the guys know exactly what that was. But that's that big drop in the middle. And notice that afterward, the RX stands for relaxation period. And I didn't go back up to my happy level of skin temperature after that. I stayed low. So I noticed that was interesting. Second thing was, she said, do you realize you're not breathing when you listen to me? And I hadn't taken a breath for 45 seconds. Okay, well, you don't breathe for 45 seconds. Some alarms start going off in your body saying, breathe. Well, that wasn't helping me in terms of keeping the adrenaline level low in my body. So I've learned some things about breathing, and but some other things. Margin, both in terms of calendar space. Have some margin. So if things go wrong, today there's at least a half hour so I can fix it. And if I'm totally booked, I can't. Margin in going to places. If I have an appointment, I used to kind of figure it out. I'm an engineer. I like to optimize. What is the last amount of time? When can I leave? The last minute I can leave so I can get there on time if all conditions are perfect. And no margin for anything to go wrong. Like the light might be red one more time than I thought. And that causes stress. Going, oh no, I'm going to be late. Now I feel like I'm hurrying. Well, there's nothing spiritual about that. That's just stupid habits. Hurry, no margin, no breaks. I never come to that cafeteria and have a cup of coffee with somebody. Hardly ever. And now I'm trying to do that. Okay. So here's some other things that I found help. Exercise. I found out I was exercising before all this happened. I found out actually I need to exercise longer. Sleep. I was sleeping before this happened. I found out I need to sleep longer. One thing that really helps is some breathing exercises. Deep breaths from your diaphragm. I was breathing like this. Just doing that, you automatically feel stressed out if you do that. You need to breathe from your diaphragm. And I had to go on some medication. That helps, I think, sometimes. If you get to the point where you're having panic attacks, that's a reasonable thing to do. Counseling. Craig talked about that a lot in his last talk. I had a lot of the same kinds of issues, and it was real helpful to talk about some of those things, and figure out what some of the things, maybe long-term anxieties, kind of like the one about, am I doing the right thing by working? Isn't that a selling out? There were some other things like that to talk out, really help. And, having a few minutes per day that I can decide what I want to do. There's a lot of good things I do. I go to work, come home, eat, that's good. Clean up, that's good. Put the kids to bed, that's good. But, if everything's all programmed, then you have no time at all for yourself to actually decide, I'd like to read this magazine, or I'd like to do this hobby for a half hour, or I'd like to take a walk. They were all good things that were giving me absolutely no choice. And I mean, that's a little bit overpositioned, but I found it real helpful to have some of that time. Okay, finally, almost finally. One thing I've also found helpful is to worship. And by that I mean thinking about God and his attributes. My issues start to seem small. Intel seems small. My issues, AMD seem small. In fact, you know that God doesn't have imitators coming from the low end. Yeah, no problem with demand. There's no demand problem. My problem seems small when I meditate on God. And even though my problems seem small, they're significant to God, and he cares about them. So even better. My problems are small, but God still cares about them. And kind of the summary, one thing God has spoken, two things I have heard, that you, O God, are strong, and you, O Lord, are loving. That's, again, the strength and the loving thing. And you can look at my plan. There's a couple things that I'm doing differently, and my work goal. I'll let you look at that yourself, but I think we're out of time. So I really appreciate your listening to me. If anybody has any questions, feel free to contact me. And I appreciate your attention. Like I said, I hope this was helpful. It's my, as you can tell, very personal thoughts about stress and what I can do about it. Hopefully they were helpful to you. Thanks.